I had just landed a job in New York. I would say it was pretty much my dream job. The pay was amazing. The area I was going to be living in was exciting. And it was the day I was supposed to leave. Actually, it was just a few hours before I was supposed to leave. And I made a last-minute stop at the chiropractor. In my previous job, we'd spent hours and hours hunched over our keyboards, meeting deadlines, and I was a little stiff, a little tight. And I thought it would be nice to be relaxed and feeling good before I got on the plane to head for New York. And went in for the appointment. I'd had appointments like this before, and just everything went wrong. Early on in the appointment, the chiropractor did a quick, rapid adjustment of my neck. And as soon as he did it, it was like the entire earth had just snapped off its axis. Everything was spinning very rapidly and in multiple directions. And my instinctive reaction was to try and get up and right myself to see if I could shake off the dizziness, shake off what was happening. And my arms and legs just didn't work. They were just like jello. And on top of that, everything was spinning so fast that I had absolutely no orientation. So when I tried to get up, I literally slammed into the wall, I slammed into the desk, and eventually I ended up on the floor. And at first the chiropractor just stood there like he didn't really understand. It almost felt like he didn't understand what he was seeing. And he didn't really do anything. And after studying me for a few minutes, he got down on the floor and he started adjusting my neck again, yanking on my neck, rotating my head. And as a surgeon told us several days later, any one of those jerking movements could have completely severed the artery in my neck, and I would have died instantly. But anyway, he had me on the floor. He was working on the neck. He kept trying to adjust his way out of this, and it just wasn't working. And then things escalated further. My symptoms were continuing to get worse. But then I saw through the corner of my eye, through all this haze, I saw people peeking in the room, very panicked. They heard me screaming, came to see what was going on, and when they saw me fairly graphically injured on the floor, they started getting nervous and started making for the parking lot. And at that point, the chiropractor just left me. He went to block the doorway of his clinic and encourage these other patients not to leave. And I heard him summon his secretary. When he left the room, he summoned his secretary, who was basically a college student with no medical training. And he sent her in, and she was kind, but she had no idea what to do. So she's down on the floor, and he instructed her to rub my neck, give me a neck massage, which again, the surgeon later told us that that's not what you do in that situation, and it could have killed me. So over the course of 2 hours, he would come in, and he would keep working on the neck, like he thought somehow cranking on the neck was going to fix this and make it go away. And then when he had to go attend to other patients, he would leave me with the secretary, and the secretary would go back to giving me a neck massage. And finally, after 2 hours with things just not getting any better, he called 911. They took me to a local hospital, and what we didn't know at the time is the attending physician at the local ER had just been involved in a series of malpractice events, including the death of a girl from my hometown. And I didn't have a whole lot better luck with him than she did. He initially didn't even see me. He took almost an hour before he decided to examine me. And when he did examine me, he overlooked the abrupt loss of coordination. He overlooked the dizziness. He missed the erratic eye movements that I was experiencing. All of these are classic brain injury symptoms, and he missed all of them. And he determined that I had a simple ear infection, didn't order a brain scan to verify what was going on, determined that I had an ear infection, and he sent me home. And over the course of the next 2 days, I began to deteriorate. Things just kept getting worse. And finally, on Sunday, this injury occurred on a Friday, in the morning, early in the morning on Friday. So sometime after lunch on Sunday, my mother realized this was not an ear infection. She finally recognized that between the pain, the dizziness, and just the way I was degrading, that something really terrible was wrong. And she called the hospital back and explained what was going on and demanded to speak with their oldest physician. They had a doctor on staff who'd been there for more than 30 years. And he said, this isn't an ear infection, there's no way. And he said, don't wait for 911, don't wait for a rescue squad, just get Tom in the car and get over here now. So we got over, he ordered a brain scan. For the second time in 2 days, I was misdiagnosed. He came out with the scan and told my family that I had inoperable brain cancer and I was close to death. And at this point, they sent for the chaplain. The chaplain came to pray with my family and prepare them to say goodbye to me. So I'm laying in this emergency room on a gurney, and they're preparing my family to expect that I'm going to be dead in a few hours and they should say goodbye. And in the middle of this, a younger doctor came along and said, wait just a minute, let me see the films. And he held up the films to the light like this and he said, this isn't cancer, it's a bleed. And he put 2 and 2 together that I think what happened is the chiropractor did something to the artery and caused a bleed. And he told my family, Tom is still going to die because now we've waited too long to treat him. 2 days is way too long with this injury. And he still prepared them to expect my death soon, but he ordered me sent to a large regional medical center with the hope that they could do something. And once I got there, they started doing tests and they confirmed the brain injury. They also confirmed that the injury occurred when the artery was damaged during the chiropractic adjustment. And from there, it was just a bedside vigil for several days where every couple hours, if I survived, they'd say, well, Tom maybe has a 5% chance of living, and then they'd upgrade it to 10. And it just went back and forth like that with them examining me over and over again. And during this time, there were a lot of things that happened to my family. This didn't just happen to me. You have to imagine what this must have been like for them to get the call from me the night before that I've gotten this job in New York and I'm heading to the Big Apple and I'm healthy, I'm happy, I'm a bodybuilder, I'm athletic, I'm doing all these things. And in just the space of however many hours, I went from that to being close to death. Then they're wrongfully told that I have brain cancer and I'm going to die. And they're being asked to join a chaplain in prayer to give me a send-off. And then after all of that, being told, well, now we have the right diagnosis, but it's too late because we misdiagnosed him and he's going to die. So they went through all of that. Among the things this injury did to my family was the trauma it inflicted on all of them. My mother and my father spent however many hours watching me fight just to cling to life. And just the sheer trauma that inflicted on them and my sister. And in the middle of that, my parents were simply too shattered to really be objective and make some of the tougher decisions. And at one point early on in my hospital stay, my brain was swelling to the point it was literally trying to push against the inside of my skull. That precious 2 days that we lost with that misdiagnosis allowed the brain to swell wildly out of control. And the surgeon came in the room and realized that he couldn't talk to my parents, and he pulled my sister into the corridor and said, look, Tom's brain is swelling at a rate that's just not sustainable anymore. And he said, we have a tough decision to make. The medical procedure would be to go in and start drilling holes in Tom's head to relieve the pressure, give the blood a chance to escape, and allow the brain someplace to go so that it doesn't just keep swelling out of control. But he said, if I drill those holes, your brother will not be your brother anymore. You will not know the person who comes off the operating table. And my sister was put in the position of having to make this decision, and he point blank asked her, what would Tom want me to do? And my sister told him he'd rather that you let him die. And she made the call, we're not going to drill the holes, we're going to gamble that he can survive this. And then they went back into the room and he started giving me what we were later told could have been lethal doses of anti-inflammatory drugs. Just bombarding me with doses they normally wouldn't use, trying desperately to get the swelling down, and luckily it did work, but not before additional damage was done, and not before my sister had that terrible burden placed on her. That was a decision she didn't need to have to make, and because of the circumstances, that's the position she was thrown into. I made it out of the hospital and came home, but that was really just the beginning of the nightmare, because as soon as I got home, there were so many symptoms I was hit with. The medications they were giving me at the hospital wore off, and I was greeted by the full brunt of this untreated brain injury once I got home. The vertigo and the spinning were just as bad as they were when the artery blew, and it would come on at random several times a day, and even in between those attacks, I just was constantly dizzy and didn't get any kind of rest from it whatsoever. There was no position I could assume. There was just nothing I could do. And by medical standards, brain injuries are still a very new phenomenon. They're not well understood. And what tends to happen is patients are sent home with no real guidelines in terms of what to expect. The doctors don't sometimes know what to expect, and so the patients are sent home with no idea as to what symptoms they should expect, what can happen, what things could trigger things and make them worse for them. And that was my situation. I came home with absolutely no clue what was going to happen, and I ended up stumbling through all of these complications without any real guidance to help me through the process. One of the great challenges that brain injury survivors face is not just the misunderstanding, but the fact that quite often brain injuries are invisible disabilities. Unlike an injury where perhaps you have a scar on your face, or you're missing a limb, or you limp, there's nothing really visible about a brain injury. A person can look completely normal and have a really serious brain injury with lots of complications. And that was the case for me. And I still remember through some of the worst parts of my injury, people kept telling me, well, you sure look good. And I wasn't okay. I was doing terribly. But again, they had this misconception in their minds that I was supposed to look a certain way, or that there should be something visibly wrong with me, and there just wasn't. And it didn't just translate to how people treated me in public. It became a real problem when I went to seek care. When I tried to find rehabilitative care, there were many times I reached out to physical therapists and other care facilities, and they turned me away because they said, you know, you just seem like you're fine. And nothing could have been further from the truth. There were other times where I wanted to get public assistance. There wasn't much available because the safety net in my home state has really been dismantled over the years, but I tried a few times. And again, they kept saying, you're in too good a shape. Debilitated with vertigo, having all these other problems, and they still said, well, you're not in a wheelchair, you're in too good a shape. You look fine. And when I would need shopping assistance at local stores, like the grocery store, whatever kind of help I was trying to get, I routinely ran into this barrier where, because my disability is essentially invisible, I couldn't get help. And the flight path of this injury wasn't just the medical side, it was the legal side. This injury financially devastated my family in ways that are really hard to recap. My mom and dad were basically a working couple, nearing retirement. They'd managed to save a little money, but they were not a couple of means. That just was not the case. And at the time of this injury, they were gearing up to enjoy their retirement. They weren't going to Tahiti, they weren't going to Hawaii, they were just going to stay at their home in Whitewater and just ride out the remainder of their days living very simply. And that all got blown up when this happened. The medical needs from this injury were devastating and across the board. Right off the bat, I lost my health insurance, and no other health insurance company wanted me, and we ended up in a high-risk insurance pool where at that time it was not uncommon for policies to go as high as a couple $1,000s a month. And the medical bills were pouring in faster than we could even calculate. I needed care urgently and in a number of areas that were not uncovered by insurance, that insurance just wouldn't pay for. And so I still remember the sight of my dad just absolutely pale in the face as he was sitting and looking at bills and trying to figure out how to pay for this. And as time wore on, Mom and Dad, they were maxing out credit cards, they were taking out loans, they refinanced the house not just once, but twice. And it just buried them financially to a degree that we've never come back from. And obviously, I lost my income. I had gone from being about to begin this glorious IT career to having absolutely nothing coming in and being too debilitated to really do much of anything. And, you would assume that there was this big payday in court. You would assume that with all the things that happened, there would have been $1 million settlement. And I routinely have people tell me, well, what was it like? They'll ask me, what was it like to win that big settlement? There wasn't a settlement. The laws in my home state are easily among the worst in the nation. Our malpractice statutes are so stilted in favor of doctors and hospitals that it's almost impossible to win any kind of malpractice action in the state of Wisconsin. Even in a case like mine where we had conclusive proof that the artery was torn, or if we want to be precise, the artery was dissected during the chiropractic appointment. The chiropractor did all these things like waiting over 2 hours to call 911, repeatedly adjusting my neck, leaving me in the care of a receptionist with no medical training. We had proof of all of that. Have proof of what happened at the ER, the fact that they misdiagnosed me, cost me 2 days, sent me home with my brain bleeding out and swelling. And that delay could have cost me my life. And despite all of those things being proven under the new laws in Wisconsin, that's not enough. And I never received a settlement. And economically, my family just never recovered from this. And that's one of the reasons we're embarking on this journey with GoFundMe and with Life Beyond Brain Injury, is it's going to take some kind of extraordinary community effort to get me back on my feet and help heal my family from this event. One of the things that's come up a number of times in discussing this has been, why now? Why the delay? And there are several factors involved. Again, the malpractice statutes in my state are really stilted in favor of the hospitals and the doctors, and they also afford sort of a timeline. In cases like this, what typically happens is the case doesn't even start to approach court for about 5 years. The opposing counsel is allowed that period of time to see if the person dies, do they live? If they live, do they get better? Do they still have impediments? And so we went through that 5-year window before we finally got to the point where we had our day to try and get this into court, and we lost and the judge ended the case. So that was the first 5 years. And then after that, there was another 2-year window where I continued to shop this case around the state looking for some lawyer somewhere who could come up with some kind of way to make my case viable and get it through court and hopefully bring us a financial recovery. And that came to an end about 2 years later, and I actually still remember the night this occurred. I was having huge complications from the brain injury. I was having really severe vertigo, and I was so dizzy I could barely walk, and the call came in and I knew who it was from, and I asked my dad to take me outside, and he basically took me outside and helped me sit down on the porch, and he just gave me some privacy to take the call from this lawyer. And this attorney said in no uncertain terms, he said, there is nothing left that can be done. I have called all my colleagues around the state, and they've assured me there is no way to make your case viable under the current law. And at this point, you have no legal remedies left. There's nothing legally that you can do, and you're not going to get a settlement. And then the second part came where he said, you cannot talk about your story. Other families who have come forward to share their story have been sued. And he said, I'm fearful that if you try to come forward and share your story, either the chiropractor's lawyer or the hospital's lawyer would come after you and your family, and then you could be in an even worse situation. And he said, I know it's hard, but you just need to move on. And so we basically did our best to soldier through this from that point on. And of course, at the time this happened, GoFundMe wasn't even invented yet anyway. So we just drifted through the years. And now things have just hit a crisis point. A few years back, my dad's health began to fail. He had a series of heart attacks. And eventually he had to be put in a nursing home. And because of all the medical and other financial damage done to us by my injury, there were no resources left for my dad's care. And he ended up going on Title 19 to get into the nursing home. And so now the county is waiting. Dad passed, and now the county is waiting to take a shot at taking the house. So there's a very great urgency at this point. My family has dwindled over the years since this happened. All of my uncles have passed. My grandmother passed. And it's now just my elderly mother who has been through such a beating as a result of all the stress and other burdens this has imposed on the family, and my sister, who's having medical problems of her own. So the time is now to assure that I have a roof over my head and that not only I, but what's left of my family can recover from this event and get our legs under us for the first time in years. The moment is now.